The first thing I noticed after buying the house wasn't the cracked driveway, the outdated kitchen, or the tree growing too close to the roof. It was the name that wasn't there. I had owned the house for 19 days when I found the problem. My name was on the deed. The previous owner's name was on the deed. The owner before him was on the older records. But between 1987 and 1991, there was nothing. For years had simply disappeared. At first, I assumed it was a clerical error. By the time I realized it wasn't, I had already discovered that the house had been sold once before without the person listed on the deed actually having the legal right to sell it. And somehow, after all these years, I had become the person holding the evidence. My name is Ellis Mercer. I'm 58, divorced, and after 32 years working for the same regional packaging company, I finally decided I wanted something quieter. I wasn't looking for a mansion. I wasn't even looking for a particularly nice house. I wanted somewhere I could spend the next 20 years without hearing traffic through my bedroom window. I'd spent most of my adult life renting apartments and moving whenever the rent increased. So when I found a 3-bedroom house outside a small town in Pennsylvania, I thought I'd finally found what I was looking for. The house was built in 1974. It sat on just under an acre of land at the end of a quiet road. There was an old detached garage, a long driveway, a few mature maple trees, and a backyard that bordered a narrow strip of woods. The asking price was $287,000. It wasn't cheap, but it was lower than similar homes in the area. The realtor, Tessa Wren, told me there was nothing unusual about it. It's been sitting for a while, she said. Why? The kitchen needs work. That's mostly it. I walked through the house twice. I checked the basement. I checked the roof. I looked for water damage. I even brought a contractor friend to inspect the foundation. Everything came back normal. The seller was a man named Orson Vale. He was 67 and lived about an hour away. He had inherited the property from his aunt, according to the listing. That was the first thing that didn't sit right with me, but not enough to worry me. People inherit houses all the time. The closing was completely ordinary. There were stacks of documents. The title company confirmed the title was clear. The county records matched the seller's paperwork. I signed everything. I wired the money. And just like that, the house was mine. I remember standing in the empty living room after the closing and feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. No landlord. No lease. No worrying about rent. No one telling me what I could hang on the walls. I spent the first week doing small things. I replaced a broken light fixture. Painted the guest room. Changed the locks. Trimmed the bushes. The house felt better every day. Then, on the 19th morning, I went to the county administration building to register for a local property tax adjustment. The clerk asked me for a copy of my deed. I handed it over. She typed something into her computer. Then she frowned. Have you owned this property before? No. Has anyone in your family owned it? No. She looked at the screen again. That's strange. What? She turned the monitor slightly toward herself. There are older records attached to this parcel. Okay. Some of them aren't digitized. Is that a problem? No. Just unusual. She pulled out a file. It was thick. Much thicker than I expected. She opened it. The first page showed my name. The next showed Orson Vale. Before him was a couple named Hollis and Maribel Dane. Before them was another owner. I recognized the name because it was on the original property records. But then she turned another page. 1987. The next page was 1991. Nothing for 1988. Nothing for 1989. Nothing for 1990. I asked her whether those pages were missing. She said, no. Then what happened? She looked at me. They were never recorded. That answer bothered me. How can a house exist for 4 years without an owner? She shrugged. It happens. How? Estate transfers. Probate issues. Private transfers. Sometimes records get delayed. For years. She didn't answer. I asked whether I could get copies of the older documents. She said some were restricted because they contained personal information. But she printed the public property history for me. I took it home. That night, I spread the records across my dining table. The timeline was straightforward. 1974, property constructed. 1974 to 1982, owned by a couple named Alden and Pearl Mercer. 1982 to 1987, owned by Hollis and Maribel Dane. 1991 to 2003, owned by Walter and June Vale. 2003 to 2018, owned by Orson Vale. 2018 to 2026, apparently held by Orson before he sold it to me. But 1987 to 1991 was blank. No transfer. No mortgage. No probate entry. Nothing. I called Tessa. Did you know there was a gap in the ownership history? She sounded surprised. What gap? Between 1987 and 1991. I don't know what you're talking about. I have the records. She was quiet. Then she said, Ellis, the title company cleared everything. I know. So, what's the problem? I don't know yet. She laughed nervously. You're not thinking of backing out, are you? It's already closed. Exactly. I asked her who had owned the property during those 4 years. She said she would check with the title company. The next morning, she called me back. They said it was a probate matter. Whose probate? She hesitated. They didn't give me a name. Can you get one? Probably not. That made me even more curious. I decided to call the title company myself. The representative who answered was polite. I gave him the property address. He pulled up the file. Then he asked, Why are you asking about 1987? Because the county records have a gap. Yes. Why? He paused. It's complicated. That's not an answer. No, it isn't. Then give me the complicated answer. He sighed. There was a private transfer. Between whom? I can't disclose that. Why? Because the person involved isn't part of the current title chain. What does that mean? It means the transfer wasn't treated as a standard sale. I asked him if the property had ever been involved in litigation. He said, Not according to the title report. Ever. Not that affected your ownership. That wording bothered me. Not that affected your ownership. I asked him directly. Could someone else have had a claim to this property? He said, Not according to the title insurance policy. That's different from saying no. He went quiet. Then he said, Mr. Mercer, your title is insured. I understand. You're protected. From what? Another pause. Potential defects. That was the first time anyone had used the word defect. I thanked him and hung up. I didn't sleep well that night. The next day, I went back to the county office. The same clerk was working. I asked if there was any way to view historical documents that weren't part of the current title chain. She said there was one possibility. The county had an old index book containing handwritten property transactions. It was stored in a records room. She brought it out. The book was enormous. The pages were yellow and brittle. I searched by parcel number. The entries matched the digital records. Then I noticed something. The 1987 entry wasn't blank. Someone had written something in the margin. A small notation. Transferred by agreement. No name. No date. Just those 3 words. I asked the clerk about it. She leaned closer. That wasn't typed. No. Looks handwritten. Can you tell whose handwriting? She laughed. Absolutely not. I pointed to the next page. There was another note. This one was even stranger. See private file. I asked what private file meant. She looked uncomfortable. I don't know. Can I see it? No. Why? Because it's sealed. By whom? She looked at me. That's what I can't tell you. I left the office with a photocopy of the page. On the drive home, I started wondering whether I had made a mistake buying the house. Not because I thought I was going to lose it. The title insurance protected me. But because I had the feeling someone had spent years making sure nobody asked questions about the 4 missing years. When I got home, I noticed a truck parked across the street. It was an older gray pickup. I didn't recognize it. There was a man sitting inside. He looked to be in his 60s. I went inside. 20 minutes later, I looked through the window. The truck was gone. I didn't think much of it. Until the next morning. I found an envelope tucked under my front door. There was no stamp. No address. No name. Inside was a photocopy of an old document. At the top was my property address. Below it were 2 names. One was Maribel Dane. The other was a woman I'd never heard of. Evelyn Rusk. Under their names was a handwritten sentence. Neither of them owned this house. I read it 3 times. Then I turned the page over. There was another sentence. Ask why the house was transferred in 1989. I stood in my hallway holding the paper. The county records said there had been no recorded owner between 1987 and 1991. But someone knew about a transfer in 1989. Someone knew enough to leave me a message. And someone apparently believed the title history of my house was a lie. I looked out the front window. Across the street, the same gray pickup was parked again. This time, the driver wasn't inside. I watched it for several minutes. Then my phone rang. It was Tessa, my realtor. Her voice sounded different. Ellis, I need you to listen to me carefully. What happened? The title company called me this morning. Why? They asked whether you've been asking questions about the 1989 transfer. I felt my stomach tighten. How would they know I was asking? I don't know. What did you tell them? Nothing. She paused. Then she said, "They also asked me whether you've contacted Orson." "I haven't." "You should." "Why?" "Because there's something you need to know about the person who owned your house before him." "Who?" Tessa lowered her voice. "His aunt never actually owned the property." I called Tessa back immediately. "What do you mean Orson's aunt never owned the property?" She hesitated. "I probably shouldn't have said that." "You already did." "I know. So explain it." "I don't have the whole story." "Then tell me what you do know." She took a breath. "When Orson listed the house, he told us he inherited it from his aunt, Lenora Vale." "Okay." "But when the title company reviewed the older records, they couldn't find a standard transfer from Lenora to Orson." I stared at the kitchen wall. "So how did Orson get the house?" "That's what I don't know." "Then why did the title company insure it?" "Because the current deed is valid." "That doesn't explain the past." "No." I asked her whether she had ever met Lenora. She said no. Apparently Lenora had died years earlier and Orson had handled everything through an attorney. That should have ended the conversation. Instead, Tessa said something else. "There was one thing." "What?" "When I first listed the property, Orson specifically told me not to mention the old ownership history." "Why?" "He said it would scare buyers." I felt my stomach tighten. "Did he tell you there was a problem?" "No." "Then why hide it?" "He called it a family matter." That phrase stayed with me. A family matter. It seemed like everyone connected to the house had a different explanation. The county called it a private transfer. The title company called it a potential defect. Tessa called it a family matter. And the person who left the envelope under my door apparently thought the entire history had been fabricated. I decided I needed to talk to Orson. I found his number in the closing documents. He answered on the fourth ring. "Ellis." "Yes." "Everything okay with the house?" "Mostly." He laughed. "That's usually how it starts." "What do you mean?" "New house. New owner. Something always needs fixing." "I have a question about the ownership history." He went silent. "What kind of question?" "The gap between 1987 and 1991. Another silence. Then he said, "Where did you hear about that?" "The county records." "No." "What?" "You shouldn't have found that." The way he said it made my skin crawl. I asked, "What happened in 1989? He didn't answer. "Orson." Finally, he said. "My aunt didn't want anyone talking about that period." "Why?" "Because people were hurt." I thought he meant financially. Then he corrected himself. "Not physically." That distinction bothered me. "What happened?" "I can't explain it over the phone." "Then meet me." He hesitated. "Tomorrow afternoon." "Where?" "A diner called Miller's Corner." I agreed. Before hanging up, he said, "Bring the document you received." I hadn't told him about the envelope. I froze. "How do you know I received a document?" He didn't answer. The call ended. I immediately called Tessa. "Did you tell Orson about the envelope?" "No." "Are you sure?" "Yes." "Then how does he know?" She was silent. I told her what he had said. She sounded worried. "Don't meet him alone." I wasn't planning to. "Ellis, I'm serious." "So am I." The next afternoon, I met Orson at Miller's Corner. He was already sitting in a booth. He looked older than when I had seen him at closing. His coffee was untouched. He stood when I approached. "You came." "You asked me to." I sat down. He looked at the envelope. "You brought it." "Yes." "Where did you get it?" "It was under my door." He nodded slowly. "That means someone wants you involved." "Who?" "I don't know." "You know more than you're telling me." He looked out the window. "My aunt was a difficult woman." "That doesn't explain anything." "She believed the house belonged to her." "Did it?" "No." That answer shocked me. "Then why did she live there?" "Because someone let her." "Who?" "My grandfather." "Did he own it?" "Not officially." I stared at him. "So who did?" Orson leaned closer. "A woman named Evelyn Rusk." "The same name from the document." "Who is she?" "My grandfather's business partner." "What business?" "Real estate." "Then why wasn't her name on the deed?" "Because she disappeared." I waited. "What does disappeared mean?" "She left town." "When?" 1989. The same year written on the anonymous document. I asked whether she was reported missing. "No." "Then she didn't disappear." "Not officially." "What happened to her?" Orson shook his head. "Nobody knows." I showed him the photocopy. He looked at it. His expression changed. "Where did you get this?" "Someone left it for me." He turned the paper over. Then he whispered, "This is one of the originals." "Originals of what?" "An agreement." "What agreement?" "The 1989 transfer." I leaned forward. "You said there was no transfer." "I said there was no recorded transfer." "What's the difference?" "A lot." He explained that Evelyn Rusk had owned a controlling interest in a small property company with my house among its assets. She had supposedly transferred the property to another person through a private agreement, but the agreement had never been recorded with the county. Instead, it was held privately by an attorney. Then Evelyn disappeared from the business. Her name vanished from company records. And 4 years later, the house appeared under a different owner. I asked, "Who is the new owner?" "Walter Vale, his grandfather." I stared at him. "So your grandfather got the house from Evelyn." That's what everyone believed. Did he? Orson looked down. No. Then who transferred it? That was the problem. I asked what happened to Evelyn's share of the business. Orson said it was sold. To whom? A company called Alderstone Holdings. I recognized the name. It was still operating. A regional real estate investment firm. How much did they pay? About $1.2 million. When? 1990. And the house? It was supposedly included in the sale. But the deed wasn't changed until 1991. Yes. I asked why. Orson looked uncomfortable. Because the person who had to sign the transfer was gone. Evelyn. Yes. So someone else signed? Yes. Who? He didn't answer. I asked again. Who signed the deed? He finally said. My grandfather. I stared at him. He signed for Evelyn? Yes. Without her? I don't know. That sounds illegal. It probably was. I asked why the title company hadn't caught it. Because the original deed was still valid. But if someone forged the transfer dash, it wasn't a forgery. Then what was it? Orson looked at me. A power of attorney. I felt a chill. Evelyn gave your grandfather power of attorney? Apparently. Apparently? No one has seen the original. I understood. Everything depended on one missing document. The power of attorney. If it existed, the transfer might have been legitimate. If it didn't, the entire chain of ownership could be challenged. I asked where the document was. Orson said, my aunt had it. Lenora? Yes. Then why didn't she give it to you? She tried. I stared at him. What happened? She died before she could. I asked when. 3 years ago. That was when he had inherited the property. I suddenly understood why he had sold it. He hadn't wanted the house. He wanted the problem gone. Did you know about the missing power of attorney when you sold me the house? He looked away. Yes. I felt my anger rise. You sold me a house knowing the ownership history was incomplete. The current title was valid. That isn't what I asked. I didn't lie. You didn't tell me. I was advised not to. By whom? He didn't answer. Orson. He looked at me. The attorney handling my aunt's estate. What's his name? Brennan Vale. Your relative? No. Then why did he handle the estate? Because he'd handled my grandfather's. I wrote the name down. Where is he? Philadelphia. Still practicing? I think so. I asked for his number. Orson refused. Instead, he said, Alice, if you start pulling at this thread, you're going to find things you don't want to know. Like what? He looked directly at me. My grandfather didn't just acquire that house. What did he do? He acquired everything Evelyn Rusk owned. Her business too? Yes. How? That is the part nobody agrees on. I left the diner with more questions than answers. On the drive home, I kept thinking about Evelyn. She had owned the property. She had owned part of a real estate company. She had disappeared in 1989. Her assets had ended up with Walter Vale. Then everything had eventually passed to Orson. It looked like a simple family inheritance story. Except for one problem. Evelyn's family had never appeared anywhere in the records. That night, I searched public records for her name. I found a few old business filings. Evelyn Rusk had been a partner in Alderstone Realty. Then, suddenly, she wasn't. The business records showed a transfer of ownership in September 1989. The buyer was Walter Vale. The price was listed as $10. $10. For a company whose assets were worth more than $1 million. That couldn't be right. I searched further. I found an old newspaper archive. A small article from October 1989 mentioned Evelyn Rusk. It said she had voluntarily withdrawn from the local real estate market. There was no mention of her disappearing. No mention of a dispute. No mention of Walter Vale. But the article included one sentence that caught my attention. Rusk's withdrawal follows an unresolved disagreement concerning several properties. Several properties. Not one. I kept searching. There were 4 properties. All 4 had similar gaps in their ownership histories. All 4 eventually ended up connected to the Vale family. I suddenly realized something. My house wasn't the only property. It was one piece of a much larger transaction. The next morning, I received another envelope. This time, it contained a photograph. Evelyn Rusk was standing outside my house. The date printed on the back was August 1989. But she wasn't alone. Standing beside her was Walter Vale, and behind them was a young woman I didn't recognize. On the back of the photograph, someone had written, "She knew what he was going to do." I stared at the young woman. There was something familiar about her. I couldn't explain why. Then I noticed a tiny detail in the background. The house number. It was my house. And suddenly, I understood why someone had been leaving these documents for me. They weren't trying to scare me away from the property. They were trying to make me understand why I owned it. I couldn't stop looking at the woman in the photograph. There was something about her face that bothered me. Not because I recognized her. Because I almost did. She looked familiar in the same strange way a face from an old dream can feel familiar. I enlarged the photograph on my computer. The image was grainy, but there was enough detail to see 3 people standing in front of my house. Evelyn Rusk, Walter Vale, and the unknown woman. The date on the back was August 17th, 1989. I searched the date. Nothing. I searched Evelyn's name with Walter's. Nothing useful. Then I searched the unknown woman's description. Still nothing. I decided to take the photograph to the County Historical Archive. The archivist, a woman named Merritt Shaw, examined it for almost 10 minutes. Finally, she looked up. "Where did you get this?" "Someone left it for me." She turned the photograph over. "Do you know who these people are?" "I know 2 of them. Walter Vale and Evelyn Rusk." She nodded. "And the woman?" "No idea." Merritt studied her face again. Then she walked toward a cabinet. She returned with an old business directory. She flipped through several pages. "Here." She pointed at a photograph. My heart skipped. It was the same woman. The caption read, "Celia Rusk, Office Administrator, Rusk and Vale Realty." I stared at the page. Rusk, Evelyn's younger sister. I asked why I had never seen her name in the property records. Because she wasn't an owner. What was she? Bookkeeper, apparently. I asked what happened to her. Merritt closed the directory. That's a complicated question. Everyone keeps saying that. She smiled. You're dealing with 1989. Complicated was practically the town's official language. I asked whether Celia had any connection to the house. Merritt said she didn't know. Then she added, there was a dispute. Between Celia and Walter? Between everyone. I asked what she meant. She pulled another folder. This one contained newspaper clippings. One article mentioned a disagreement over the sale of several properties. Another mentioned Evelyn's departure from the company. A third mentioned Celia. That article was only 3 paragraphs long. Celia Rusk had reportedly challenged a property transfer involving several parcels. Then the article ended with a sentence. Rusk declined further comment. I asked Merritt when that was. September 1989. 1 month after the photograph. I looked at her. Did Celia disappear too? No. That surprised me. Where is she now? Merritt hesitated. She's alive. My heart started beating faster. Where? I can't give you someone's private information. Can you tell me whether she's still in Pennsylvania? Merritt looked at me. Yes. Nearby? Yes. I asked if she had ever testified about the property transfers. Merritt shook her head. Not publicly. Then I need to find her. Merritt gave me a warning. Be careful. Why? Because people who have spent 30 years avoiding a subject usually have a reason. I thanked her and left. That afternoon, I searched public business records until I found a possible address for Celia. It was in a small town about 40 minutes away. I drove there. The house was modest. 1-story brick. Small garden. No expensive car. No security system. I almost turned around. Then the front door opened. An elderly woman stepped outside. She looked at me. I looked at her. And immediately recognized her. It was the woman in the photograph. Celia Rusk? She stared at me. Yes. My name is Alice Mercer. Her expression changed. Not confusion. Recognition. You bought the house. I froze. How do you know? She looked toward the street. Come inside. I followed her. The living room was filled with old furniture and shelves of books. She sat across from me. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she said, Your father would have hated this. I felt a chill. My father. She nodded. Harold Mercer. How do you know him? I knew him very well. That wasn't possible. My father had never mentioned her. What did you know him from? Business. What business? She smiled sadly. Not the kind you think. I asked her about Evelyn. Celia looked down at her hands. My sister was stubborn. Was she honest? Yes. Did Walter Vale steal her properties? Celia didn't answer immediately. Then she said, "He tried." That wasn't the answer I expected. What happened? Evelyn discovered that Walter had been moving properties between companies. Why? To hide who actually controlled them. I asked whether the house had been part of that scheme. Yes. Who owned it? Evelyn. Then how did Walter get it? He didn't. I stared at her. But the records say your grandfather owned it. My grandfather? She looked surprised. I realized I had never told her Walter was Orson's grandfather. She nodded slowly. Then the records are exactly what I feared. I asked her to explain. She said Evelyn had purchased the house through a holding company. The property was never supposed to be transferred to Walter. But in 1989, Walter created a second company. That company acquired several properties from Evelyn's original business. The transactions were structured so that the public records appeared ordinary. But privately, Walter was trying to gain control over everything. Evelyn discovered it. She confronted him. And then she vanished from the business. Did Walter force her out? Celia shook her head. No. Then why did she leave? Because she thought someone was going to destroy her. Who? Not Walter. That answer surprised me. Who then? Celia stood and walked to a bookshelf. She removed an old binder. Inside were copies of business records. She placed one in front of me. It was a corporate agreement dated August 1989. I read it. Then I read it again. There was a company name I didn't recognize. Mercer Industrial Holdings. I looked at Celia. My last name. Yes. Why is my family name on this? She sat down. Because your father was involved. My hands went cold. My father wasn't a real estate investor. No. Then why? He was hired to audit the company. I stared at the document. When? 1989. That explained why Celia knew him. But it created an even bigger question. What did he discover? She looked toward the window. He discovered that the property transfers weren't about real estate. What were they about? Debt. I waited. Celia explained that several local businesses had borrowed money through private agreements. Walter's companies had been buying the properties when those businesses couldn't meet their obligations. But Evelyn believed some of those debts had been manipulated. The numbers didn't match. Interest had been changed. Repayment dates had been altered. And some borrowers had been charged twice. My house was one of the properties caught in the middle. But then my father found something else. A pattern. The same attorney appeared on nearly every transaction. Brennan Vale. The attorney Orson had mentioned. I immediately understood why my father had been connected. He had discovered the same problem decades ago. Did my father confront Walter? Yes. What happened? He wanted the records corrected. Did he succeed? No. Why not? Celia looked at me. Because someone disappeared. I thought of Evelyn. Evelyn. No. Then who? Celia didn't answer. She opened another folder. Inside was a newspaper clipping. The headline was small. Local accountant found dead in vehicle. I didn't read the rest. I looked at Celia. Who is he? Jonas Bell. What did he do? He kept the original books. I felt a chill. Was he connected to my father? Yes. How? He gave your father copies of the financial records. What happened after that? Jonas died. I looked at the article again. The report said the death had been ruled accidental. His vehicle had left the road during a rainstorm. No evidence of wrongdoing had been found. But Celia clearly didn't believe that. Did my father think it wasn't an accident? Yes. What did he do? He kept investigating. Then why didn't I know any of this? Because your father wanted you away from it. I remembered his old habit of changing the subject whenever work came up. I remembered how often he told me that business wasn't something I needed to understand. At the time, I thought he was being protective. Now I realized he had been hiding an entire chapter of his life. Celia reached into the binder again. She pulled out a handwritten page. This is the last thing your father gave me. I read it. It was a list of 4 properties. My house was first. Beside it was a handwritten note. Ownership never legally transferred. My hands started shaking. What does this mean? Celia said. Your house may still belong to Evelyn's estate. I looked up. But I bought it. Yes. And the title company insured it. Yes. Then how could that be possible? Because the defect was hidden in a private agreement. I remembered what the title company representative had told me. Potential defects. I asked Celia who legally inherited Evelyn's property. She said, her daughter. I stared at her. Evelyn had a daughter? Yes. What was her name? Celia's expression changed. Maris. Maris Rusk. She nodded. Where is she? Celia didn't answer. Is she alive? Yes. Where? She lives in another state. Does she know about my house? She knows everything. I stood up. Then I need to talk to her. Celia grabbed my wrist. Don't. Why? Because she doesn't want to be found. Why? Because she believes the same people who destroyed her mother's business are still watching. I pulled my hand away. Are they? Celia looked at me. Yes. That night, I returned home. The gray pickup was parked across the street again. This time, I didn't ignore it. I walked outside. The truck started. I stepped toward the road. It drove away. I memorized the license plate. Then I called the police. They ran the plate. The truck was registered to a company. A real estate company. Alderstone Holdings. The same company that had supposedly bought Evelyn's properties in 1990. I didn't sleep that night. At 2:13 in the morning, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. One message. Stop looking into the 1989 transfer. I stared at the screen. A second message arrived. You don't know what your father found. Then a third. Ask Celia what happened to the original deed. I immediately called Celia. She didn't answer. I called again. Nothing. The next morning, I drove back to her house. Her front door was locked. Her car was gone. But there was a piece of paper lying on her porch. My name was written on it. I picked it up. Inside was a photocopy of the original 1974 deed to my house. At the bottom was a signature I recognized. Not Orson. Not Walter. Not Evelyn. My father's. And beneath his signature was a date. August 17th, 1989. The exact date on the photograph. The day Evelyn, Walter, Celia, and my father had all stood outside my house. I stood on Celia's porch staring at my father's signature. For several seconds, I couldn't even think. The date was August 17th, 1989. The same date printed on the photograph. The same day Evelyn Rusk and Walter Vale had stood outside my house. And apparently, my father had been there too. But why? I took a picture of the document before leaving. Then I drove straight home. I spread everything across the dining table. The original 1974 deed. The 1989 agreement Celia had shown me. The photograph. The county property history. My father's signature. And the anonymous messages on my phone. I tried to connect them. Nothing made sense. If my father had been involved in the property in 1989, why had he never mentioned it? He had died 8 years before I bought the house. He couldn't explain himself. But he had left behind years of financial records. I went through every box I had inherited from him. Tax documents. Old bank statements. Insurance papers. Business correspondence. Nothing. Then I remembered something. My father had always kept a small filing cabinet in his garage. After he died, I had emptied most of it and donated the contents. But I had kept one drawer because it contained family documents. I opened it. There were birth certificates, marriage records, old photographs. And at the very back, underneath a stack of property tax receipts, was a folder I had never seen before. It was labeled MH 1989. My father's initials were HM, not MH. That was unusual. I opened it. The first page was a bank statement. The account belonged to Mercer Industrial Holdings. I recognized the name immediately. The same company Celia had shown me. My father had apparently owned a small financial interest in it. I had never known that. The next document was a payment record. $18,500. Paid to Brennan Vale, the attorney. The payment date was August 19th, 1989. 2 days after the photograph. I kept digging. There were more payments. $7,200. $12,000. $5,400. All made to different accounts. And every payment was connected to one of the 4 properties. I felt sick. Had my father been part of the same scheme? Maybe he hadn't been investigating it. Maybe he had been helping. I called Orson. He answered immediately. Did you find something? Yes. What? My father. There was a long pause. What about him? He signed something on August 17th, 1989. Orson's voice changed. You found the deed. How did you know? Because I've seen it. I froze. You've seen my father's signature? Yes. When? Years ago. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't know how much you already knew. Tell me everything. He hesitated. Then he said, your father wasn't working for Evelyn. What? He was working for Walter. My stomach dropped. I sat down. You're saying my father helped Walter? Initially. Initially? Yes. Then what happened? Orson said. He realized what Walter was doing. I asked what he meant. According to Orson, my father had been hired as a financial consultant by Walter Vale. Walter wanted someone to analyze the debts attached to several properties. My father was good with numbers. He was supposed to find ways to make the transactions more profitable. Instead, he discovered something strange. Several debts had been artificially increased. Some properties had been transferred for far less than their actual value. And the same pattern appeared across multiple transactions. My father initially thought it was aggressive business. Then he discovered something worse. The debts weren't simply being manipulated. Some of them were being created. Fake charges. Backdated agreements. Inflated penalties. The purpose was to make property owners appear unable to pay. Then Walter's companies would step in and acquire the properties. I asked, was Evelyn one of the victims? Yes. Then why was she standing beside Walter in that photograph? Because she hadn't figured everything out yet. I looked at the photograph again. Evelyn wasn't smiling. Walter was. My father stood beside them. Celia was in the background. Suddenly, the picture looked completely different. I asked Orson why my father had signed the deed. He was trying to protect the property. How? By creating a private record showing that Evelyn had never voluntarily transferred it. I didn't understand. Orson explained. My father knew Walter planned to transfer the property through one of his companies. So he convinced Evelyn to sign a private agreement stating that the property could only be transferred with her written consent. That agreement wasn't filed with the county. It was kept privately. If Walter later tried to sell the property, the document could be used to challenge the transfer. I asked, then why did Walter get the house anyway? Because the agreement disappeared. Who took it? We don't know. I remembered Celia's words. The original deed. I asked Orson, where is the original agreement now? I don't know. Celia does. She used to. What does that mean? She lost it. When? After your father died. I felt a chill. Celia told me my father gave her a copy. Then she has it. She disappeared this morning. Orson went silent. You knew? No. You knew she was in danger? I knew she was afraid. That's not what I asked. He sighed. Ellis, you don't understand how long this has been going on. Then help me understand. He told me about his grandfather. Walter Vail died in 2004. After his death, the family discovered boxes of old business records. Orson's Aunt Lenora had gone through them. That's when she found references to Evelyn. Lenora became obsessed with figuring out what happened. She contacted Celia. They began comparing documents. Eventually, they found evidence that several properties had been transferred improperly. But before they could do anything, Lenora died. Orson inherited the house. He also inherited the problem. I asked him why he sold it to me. He said, because I want it out. You knew the title history was questionable. Yes. And you still sold it. Yes. I was furious. You could have told me. I should have. Then why didn't you? Because I thought the title insurance would protect you. That isn't good enough. I know. There was something in his voice. Regret. I asked, who is sending me the documents? I don't know. Who owns Alderstone Holdings? He didn't answer. Orson. I don't know. That's a lie. He finally said. Brennan Vail. The attorney. The same man who had received the payments from my father's account. I hung up. I immediately searched Alderstone Holdings. The company had offices in 3 states. Its current CEO was a man named Dorian Vail. Brennan's son. I stared at the screen. The company that had purchased Evelyn's properties in 1990 was still operating. And its current CEO was the son of the attorney who had handled the original transfers. I called their office. A receptionist answered. I asked to speak with Dorian Vail. She asked who I was. I gave my name. There was a pause. Then she said, Mr. Mercer, Mr. Vail isn't available. How do you know who I am? Another pause. I have your information from the title records. That doesn't explain it. I can take a message. I said, tell him I have the 1989 agreement. The line went completely silent. Then she said, please hold. I waited. A minute passed. Then another. Finally, Dorian answered. His voice was calm. Too calm. Mr. Mercer. You know who I am. Yes. Why? Because I know the property. That's not what I asked. He laughed softly. You've been asking questions. So have you. I've been asking questions for years. About my house? About your father. I froze. What do you know about my father? He was a complicated man. That's not an answer. He made a lot of mistakes. What kind? Financial ones. I felt my anger rise. My father wasn't a thief. I didn't say he was. You implied it. No. I implied he knew what was happening. I asked, what happened to Evelyn Rusk? Silence. Then Dorian said, "You should ask Celia." I tried. She doesn't want to talk. She was talking to me yesterday. Then she shouldn't have. That sentence made my blood run cold. Where is she? I don't know. You expect me to believe that? You don't have to believe me. I asked. Did your father know my father? Yes. How well? Very well. Did they work together? Yes. Did they steal Evelyn's properties? Dorian's voice became colder. Be careful with accusations. Then give me an explanation. You bought a house with a complicated history. I bought a house with a clean title. Exactly. Because someone cleaned it. He didn't respond. I continued. Who removed the 1989 transfer? No one removed anything. Then why is there a 4-year gap? Because the transfer was private. Who authorized it? Evelyn. She disappeared. That doesn't mean she didn't sign. My father believed she didn't. Your father believed many things. I asked. Did you know he kept records? Yes. How? Because my father spent years trying to find them. That answer changed everything. Why? Because your father copied documents he wasn't supposed to have. What documents? Financial records. From Alderstone? Yes. Where are they? Dorian said. I don't know. Then he hung up. I sat at the kitchen table for several minutes. My father had worked for Walter. He had discovered the manipulation. He had copied financial records. He had signed documents. He had tried to protect Evelyn. And apparently, Brennan Vale had spent decades trying to recover whatever my father had taken. But there was still one piece missing. Why had my father signed the 1989 deed? I went back to the photograph. This time, I noticed something I had missed. My father wasn't standing with Walter. He was standing beside Evelyn. And his body was turned slightly toward her. Like he was listening. Walter was holding a folder. Celia was watching them. Then I zoomed in. The folder in Walter's hand had a logo. Alderstone Holdings. But Alderstone didn't officially exist until 1990. I checked the corporate filing. The company was incorporated in February 1990. The photograph was August 1989. That meant Walter was already planning to create Alderstone months before it officially existed. And my father knew. I suddenly realized why the 1989 transfer was never recorded. It wasn't because the paperwork was missing. The transfer had been designed to happen later. Someone had prepared the transaction in advance. The house was being moved into a company that didn't officially exist yet. Then my phone rang. It was Celia. I answered immediately. Where are you? She whispered. Don't ask. Are you safe? For now. What happened? They found out I gave you the records. Who? Dorian. I felt my stomach drop. What does he want? The original agreement. Do you have it? Yes. Where? I can't tell you. Celia, you need to give it to the authorities. I can't. Why? Because the agreement isn't the most important document. What is? She took a shaky breath. The ledger. What ledger? Your father's ledger. I sat up. What does it contain? Every payment Walter made. To whom? To everyone. There was a pause. Then she whispered. Judges. Attorneys. Business owners. Politicians. I didn't say anything. She continued. And one payment was made to someone in your family. My heart stopped. Who? Celia's voice dropped even lower. Your mother. For a few seconds after Celia said my mother's name, I couldn't speak. My mother. Yes. Why would Walter Vale pay my mother? I don't know. You just said you had the ledger. I have part of it. Then what does the entry say? I haven't been able to read the entire page. Why not? Because the ledger is damaged. I gripped the phone tighter. What exactly does it say? Celia hesitated. Your mother's name. A date. An amount. How much? $25,000. I felt a strange pressure in my chest. My mother had never mentioned Walter Vale. Not once. She had died when I was 34, almost 15 years before I bought the house. I had always thought she and my father had lived a quiet life. Apparently, I knew almost nothing about them. Why would she get $25,000? Celia said. That's what your father wanted to know. So he knew about the payment? Yes. Did they fight about it? I don't know. Celia, you knew my father. Yes. Then tell me what happened. She was silent for several seconds. Your father came to me in September 1989. What did he say? He said he had discovered something about Walter. What? That Walter wasn't acting alone. I remembered Dorian's words. Your father made a lot of mistakes. Maybe he had been right about one thing. My father had known what was happening. But that didn't mean he had participated willingly. I asked Celia. Who else was involved? I can't say. Why? Because I don't know how many of them are still alive. That doesn't answer my question. It does if you understand what the ledger contains. She told me the ledger wasn't just a list of payments. It showed dates, amounts, initials, property numbers, and sometimes handwritten notes. Most entries were coded. My father had apparently spent years trying to decode them. One symbol appeared repeatedly beside certain payments. A small circle with a line through it. Celia said my father believed it meant transfer complete. Another symbol meant problem. And another meant protected. I asked, which symbol was beside my mother's payment? Celia didn't answer. Celia? Problem. My stomach tightened. What does that mean? Your father believed your mother had been paid because she knew something. Did she? I think so. What? I don't know. The line went silent. Then I heard something in the background. A door closing. Celia whispered. I have to go. Wait. I'll contact you. When? Soon. Celia dash. The call ended. I immediately tried calling back. No answer. I sat at the table staring at my mother's name on a blank sheet of paper. $25,000. 1989. Walter Vale. Problem. I spent the next several hours searching through my mother's belongings. After she died, I had kept several boxes in storage. I had never opened most of them. I drove to the storage unit that afternoon. The boxes were dusty. Old clothes. Christmas decorations. Family photographs. Kitchenware. I opened every box. Nothing. Then I found an old black address book. My mother's handwriting was on the first page. Most of the numbers were from the 1990s. Doctors. Friends. Neighbors. Work contacts. Then I saw a name. B. Vale. I stared at it. Next to the name was a phone number. Underneath it, my mother had written, "Do not call." I photographed the page. Then I found another note. Ask Harold about Evelyn. Harold was my father. Evelyn was the woman who supposedly disappeared. I sat on the storage unit floor. My parents had known her. Maybe both of them. And neither had ever told me. I called my father's old friend, a man named Silas Mercer. He was the only person from my father's business circle I still had contact with. I asked him about Walter Vale. He became quiet. Why are you asking? Because I'm trying to understand something from 1989. He sighed. Ellis, let the past stay buried. That's what everyone keeps telling me. Because some things are better left alone. Did my father work for Walter? Yes. Did my mother know Evelyn Rusk? Silas didn't answer. Silas? Yes. How? I don't know. You're lying. I don't know everything. Then tell me what you do know. He finally said. Your mother helped Evelyn. How? She hid something. What? I never found out. I asked whether my mother had received money from Walter. Silas immediately asked. Who told you that? That was enough. He knew. I said. The ledger. He went completely silent. Then he said. Your father spent years looking for that ledger. Why? Because it could prove everything. Everything about what? The property transfers. Was my mother involved? Yes. In what? Silas hesitated. She wasn't helping Walter. Then who was she helping? Evelyn. I closed my eyes. My mother had been helping the woman whose properties were being taken. But then why did Walter pay her $25,000? Silas said. Your mother wasn't paid to help Walter. Then why? She was paid to keep quiet. I felt sick. About what? I don't know. Silas. I swear. I believed him. He didn't know. But someone did. I asked him about Brennan Vale. Silas said Brennan had handled most of the legal paperwork. He also said Brennan wasn't simply an attorney. He was the person who created the companies used to hold the properties. Alderstone wasn't the first. There had been at least 3 others. Each one was dissolved after transferring assets to the next. A chain. A legal maze designed to make ownership almost impossible to trace. I asked why my father didn't expose it. Silas said. He tried. What stopped him? Your mother. I froze. What? Your father wanted to go to the authorities. Why didn't he? Because your mother was afraid. Afraid of what? Silas didn't answer. Afraid they would hurt us? Yes. That was the first time someone had said it clearly. My mother had been afraid for me. Maybe that's why she never told me. Maybe that's why my father kept quiet. I drove home just before sunset. The gray pickup was parked across the street again. This time I walked toward it. The driver was inside. A man in his 40s. He rolled down the window. Mr. Mercer? Yes. My name is Dorian Vale. I stopped. He stepped out. I thought we should meet. You've been following me. No. You've been watching my house. Yes. At least you're honest. I wanted to make sure you weren't being followed by someone else. I laughed. You expect me to believe that? No. Then why are you here? He looked at my house. Because you found something my family has been searching for. The ledger. He didn't deny it. Do you have it? No. Celia does. She did. I looked at him. What does that mean? She doesn't have it anymore. What did you do to her? Nothing. Where is she? I don't know. I didn't believe him. He continued. My father died last year. I thought he was alive. He was. Then why did you say he died? I meant my grandfather. Walter. Yes. Your father is Brennan. Yes. I asked him what Brennan knew. Everything. Then why hasn't he come forward? Because he thinks the documents are worthless. Why? Because they were obtained illegally. I stared at him. Your family created the transactions. That doesn't make illegally obtained evidence legal. Did you come here to threaten me? No. What do you want? To make you an offer. What kind? He pulled a folded document from his jacket. For $100,000. I stared at him. For what? The house. I almost laughed. You already knew I wouldn't sell. You haven't heard the terms. I don't care. For $100,000 cash. The house isn't worth that much. We know. Then why offer it? Because we don't want the property. What do you want? The documents. I said nothing. He continued. You give us everything you have, and we make the problem disappear. What problem? The title issue. I looked at him. You'd clear the property title? Yes. And I keep the house? No. I understood. They wanted me to sell. Then they would acquire the house and clean up the history privately. I refused. Dorian looked disappointed. You should think about it. I have. Then think harder. He got back into the truck. Before driving away, he said, Your father made the same mistake. What mistake? He thought the truth was worth more than his family. The truck disappeared down the road. I stood there watching it. Then I realized something. He had just admitted that my father had been pressured. That meant they knew my father had kept evidence. And if they knew that, they probably knew about the second copy. I went inside and locked every door. Then I called Celia. Still nothing. I called Silas. He answered. I told him Dorian had offered me $400,000. Silas went silent. Then he said, That's more than the house is worth. I know. Then they aren't buying the house. They're buying the evidence. Yes. I asked him where my father might have hidden it. Silas said, There was one place. Where? Your childhood home. I stared at him. My mother sold that house years ago. I know. What's there? Nothing now. Then why look? Because your father once told me he hid something behind the basement furnace. I immediately grabbed my keys. The house had been sold 15 years earlier. But I still knew the current owner. I called him. He was confused when I explained. But after hearing my father's name, he agreed to let me check. The next morning, I drove there. The house looked smaller than I remembered. I walked into the basement. The furnace was still there. I moved behind it. Nothing. Then I noticed a section of brick that didn't match the rest. I touched it. One brick moved. Behind it was a narrow metal container. My father's handwriting was scratched into the lid. Only if Ellis finds the house. I opened it. Inside was a small ledger. Not a copy. The original. I turned to the first page. The first entry was dated August 17th, 1989. And beside it was a payment. $25,000. Paid to my mother. But beneath that entry, my father had written something that changed everything. She did not take the money. I kept reading. The payment was made in her name without her knowledge. I turned the page. Another entry. Walter needed her name attached to the transaction. Another page. Why? Then the final line. Because the real recipient was not Evelyn. I stared at the words. The ledger had revealed that my mother hadn't been bribed. Her name had been used as a cover. But if the money wasn't for my mother, who actually received the $25,000? I turned the page. And there was the name. The person who received the money was someone I had never expected to see connected to the case. Orson Vale. I read Orson Vale's name 3 times. $25,000. August 1989. Paid in my mother's name. Received by Orson. The problem was simple. Orson had been barely 30 years old in 1989. And according to everything he told me, he wasn't involved in the business. He had claimed he only inherited the property from his aunt decades later. Now I had a ledger showing his name connected to one of the most suspicious transactions in the entire case. I photographed every page. Then I closed the ledger. I didn't call Orson immediately. For the first time, I was afraid that asking the wrong question could tell someone exactly what I had found. Instead, I went back to my father's notes. There were references to Orson scattered throughout the ledger. Not many, but enough. OV payment. OV meeting. OV knows. And one entry made my hands go cold. OV is not Walter's son. I stared at it. I knew Orson's family history. His father was Brennan Vale. His grandfather was Walter Vale. At least, that's what everyone had told me. So why would my father write that? I turned another page. Celia knows. Then, Evelyn knows. Then, Harold must confirm. Harold was my father. The final note on that page was dated September 3rd, 1989. Orson is Evelyn's son. I stopped breathing for a moment. Orson Vale wasn't Walter's grandson. He was Evelyn Rusk's son. That explained the inheritance. It explained why he had access to the property. It explained why his name appeared in the ledger. But it raised another question. Why was he using the Vale name? I called Celia again. No answer. Then I called Orson. He answered immediately. Ellis, who is your mother? Silence. I could hear him breathing. What? You heard me. Another silence. My mother was Lenora. No. Who told you that? My father. Your father. Harold Mercer. Orson didn't respond. I said, your mother was Evelyn Rusk. He finally spoke. You found the ledger. Yes. Where? That's not important. It is. Not anymore. He sighed. I was hoping you wouldn't find that. You lied to me. Yes. Why? Because I was protecting my mother. I felt confused. Evelyn is dead? No. I froze. What? She isn't dead. My hands tightened around the phone. You told me she disappeared. She did. That's not the same thing. I know. Where is she? I can't tell you. Orson. She doesn't want to be found. She's been alive this whole time? Yes. I sat down. The woman whose name had been erased from the property records wasn't dead. She had been alive somewhere for nearly 40 years. And her own son had hidden that fact. I asked. Why? Because Walter tried to find her. But Walter died in 2004. People connected to him didn't. That answer made sense. But I still didn't understand the money. Why was $25,000 paid to my mother in your name? Orson was silent. Answer me. Because your mother helped my mother escape. I stared at the wall. What? Evelyn knew Walter was going to take control of the company. She left. Yes. Where? I don't know exactly. You're her son. She didn't tell me. When did you find out? When I was 17. I thought about that. So you knew the truth your entire adult life. Yes. And you still sold me the house. I didn't know you were going to discover the records. You knew the title was questionable. Yes. And you sold it anyway. I thought the problem had been buried. I asked him who had actually received the $25,000. He said, my father. Brennan? Yes. Then why does the ledger say Orson? Because my father used my name. Why? To hide his involvement. Everything suddenly became clearer. The money hadn't gone to Orson. It had been recorded under his name to conceal the real recipient. But why my mother's name? Orson explained that Walter's people had created false records showing that my mother had received the money. The payment was actually used to pay Brennan Vale. My father had discovered the trick. That's why he had written. She did not take the money. I asked. Did my mother know? Yes. How? She was shown the document. Then why didn't she expose them? Because they threatened to expose your father as a participant. I felt sick. My father had been trapped. If he spoke, Walter could accuse him of helping create the transactions. My mother had been used as leverage. I asked. What happened to Evelyn after she left? Orson said. She went into hiding. Where? She changed her name. Does she still know about the house? Yes. Does she know I bought it? Yes. How? She asked me to sell it to you. I couldn't speak. What? She wanted the property to go to someone outside the Vale family. Why me? Because your father protected it. I suddenly remembered the anonymous envelope. The messages. The photograph. The person leaving documents for me wasn't trying to scare me. It was Evelyn. Or someone working for her. I asked. Is Evelyn the one sending me the documents? No. Then who? I don't know. That answer frustrated me. You know more than you're saying. I know enough to be afraid. I asked him to meet me. He agreed. We met at a public park an hour later. He looked exhausted. For the first time, he didn't look like a man hiding something. He looked like someone who had spent decades carrying it. He told me the real story. In 1989, Evelyn discovered that Walter and Brennan were using private debt agreements to take control of properties. She wanted out. But leaving wasn't enough. They needed her signature on several documents. She refused. That's when my father became involved. He was hired to audit the accounts. Instead of helping Walter, he started helping Evelyn. My mother became involved because she worked at the bank handling some of the transactions. She discovered that several payments were being routed through accounts that weren't listed in the official agreements. She copied records. That's why Walter used her name. He wanted to make it appear that she had received money from him. If anyone questioned the transaction, they could claim she had been paid. It was a way of discrediting her. My mother didn't steal anything. She had been framed. I asked Orson, what happened to my father? He kept investigating. And? He was followed. By who? Brennan. Did Brennan hurt him? No. Then what happened? Orson looked down. Your father gave the ledger to someone. Who? Celia. I knew that part. But Celia said my father gave her a copy. Yes. Where's the original? You found it. I realized what he meant. The ledger in my hands. My father had kept the original hidden. But why? Because he knew someone would eventually search for it. Then Orson said, there's something else. What? The property wasn't simply taken. What do you mean? Evelyn deliberately let Walter believe he owned it. Why? Because the house contained evidence. I stared at him. What evidence? Financial records. I remembered the earlier stories of hidden rooms and old documents. But this wasn't a hidden room. The evidence had been moved through legitimate-looking property transfers. The house itself had become a legal container for records. My father knew that. Evelyn knew that. Walter didn't. That was why the house had been so important. I asked Orson where the evidence was now. He said, it's gone. Who took it? My father. Brennan? Yes. When? After Walter died. I felt anger rise. So the records are gone. Most of them. Most? Orson looked at me. One document survived. What document? The original private transfer agreement. The one everyone had been searching for. I asked where it was. Orson said, Evelyn has it. I stared at him. Then why hasn't she used it? Because it doesn't prove what you think. What does it prove? That she owned the house. That sounds important. It is. Then why not challenge the title? Because she doesn't want the house back. I was confused. Then what does she want? Her name cleared. That was the real issue. She didn't want money. She didn't want the property. She wanted proof that she had not willingly surrendered her company and assets. And my father had spent years trying to get that proof. I asked Orson, where is she? He finally gave me an address. Not her current address. A church. A small community church in Vermont. He said she sometimes attended services there under another name. I drove there the following morning. The church was almost empty. An elderly woman was sitting alone in the back row. I recognized her immediately. The photograph was almost 40 years old. But I knew. Evelyn Rusk. She looked at me. Then she smiled. You have your father's eyes. I sat beside her. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, she said, I was wondering when you would find me. I asked why she had let me buy the house. She said, because your father believed you would do what he couldn't. What? Finish the record. I asked her why she had disappeared. She said, because I was afraid. Of Walter. Of everyone around him. She explained that after my father uncovered the financial records, Walter threatened to destroy his reputation. Brennan had enough influence to make the evidence disappear. And my mother was terrified that I would become involved. So Evelyn left. She changed her name. She never returned. But she kept one document. The private agreement proving the original ownership of the house. I asked her why she didn't simply release it. She looked at me. Because the document doesn't clear my name. What does? She reached into her bag. She pulled out a second document. This. I unfolded it. It was a handwritten statement signed by Walter Vale. The date was September 4th, 1989. The day after my father's final ledger entry. I read the first paragraph. Then the second. And by the time I reached the final line, I understood why everyone had spent 37 years trying to find this document. Walter had admitted that Evelyn had never voluntarily transferred her properties. But that wasn't the shocking part. The final paragraph named the person who had arranged everything. It wasn't Brennan. It wasn't Walter. It wasn't even someone from Alderstone. It was someone my father had trusted completely. Someone who had been helping him from the beginning. And that person was my mother. I read the final paragraph again. Then again. My mother's name was there. Not as someone who had been framed. Not as someone who had unknowingly received money. Walter's statement accused her of arranging the original transfer. I looked at Evelyn. Is this real? Yes. My mother did this? Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She helped create the arrangement. Why? Because she was trying to save your father. That wasn't what the document said. It made my mother look like the person who had organized the entire transfer. I asked Evelyn to explain. She told me the truth was more complicated. My mother had discovered that Walter and Brennan were preparing to take Evelyn's properties. She knew they had enough influence to make any normal legal challenge disappear. So she created a second agreement. On paper, it looked like Evelyn had voluntarily transferred control. But privately, the agreement contained conditions. The properties could never be permanently transferred. If Walter violated those conditions, ownership would return to Evelyn. The problem was that the private conditions were never recorded publicly. My mother believed the arrangement would buy enough time for my father to gather evidence. It didn't. Walter discovered the private agreement. He used it against them. He took control of the properties anyway. Then he created the false payment record showing that my mother had accepted $25,000. That made it appear as though she had been financially involved. My father knew the truth. Evelyn knew the truth. But neither could prove it. Until Walter wrote the statement. I looked at the document again. Why would Walter admit this? Evelyn's expression hardened. He didn't. What? He wrote the first half. I looked at her. And the rest. Your father added it. My heart stopped. My father. Yes. I asked how that was possible. Evelyn explained that Walter had written a private confession after a confrontation with my father in September 1989. But my father had added his own notes beneath it. He had recorded what Walter admitted verbally. The document was never filed. It was kept as evidence. I asked why my father hadn't used it. Because he was afraid. Of Walter. Of what would happen to your mother. I sat back. Everything I thought I knew about my parents was falling apart. My mother hadn't betrayed Evelyn. My father hadn't simply worked for Walter. They had both been trying to protect someone. But they had made a decision that created another problem. The private agreement made my mother look guilty. The $25,000 payment made it look like she had been bribed. And Walter's companies had gained control of the properties anyway. I asked Evelyn, why didn't you tell my father that you were alive? She looked at me. I did. What? After I left, I contacted him twice. When? Once in 1994. And? He told me never to contact him again. I was stunned. Why? He said he had a family. I understood. My father had chosen to protect us. He didn't want my mother or me pulled back into the case. But there was another question. Then why did you contact him at all? Because I had found something. What? The original deed. The one you gave me? No. She shook her head. The original 1974 deed was only part of it. She told me there was another document attached to the original deed. A legal restriction. It stated that the property could not be transferred without the approval of the original owner and a designated trustee. That trustee was my father. I stared at her. My father was the trustee? Yes. Then how did the property end up with Walter? Because the restriction was removed. By whom? Your father. I couldn't understand. Why would he remove it? He didn't. Then who did? Someone forged his approval. That was the missing piece. The entire title chain depended on a document carrying my father's name. Someone had created a false authorization showing that my father had approved the transfer. That forged approval eventually allowed Walter's companies to acquire the property. I asked Evelyn, can you prove the signature was forged? Yes. How? Your father kept his original signature samples. I remembered the folder in my father's garage. The same folder I had found. Maybe it wasn't just financial evidence. Maybe it contained handwriting samples. Evelyn said, your father spent years trying to prove the signature wasn't his. I asked her why the title company never found the problem. Because the forged approval wasn't part of the public record. It had been kept in a private legal file. And that file had eventually been transferred between attorneys. Brennan Vale had controlled it. Then his son Dorian inherited the firm's records. I suddenly understood why Dorian wanted the documents. If the forged approval became public, the entire chain of ownership could be challenged. Not just my house. All 4 properties. Possibly the entire Alderstone portfolio built from those transactions. I asked Evelyn, how many properties are involved? For originally. And now? 23. I stared at her. 23 properties. 37 years of transactions built on the same disputed documents. The house I bought wasn't the real prize. It was the key to proving the first transaction was invalid. I asked Evelyn what she wanted me to do. She said, nothing. I laughed. Nothing. You have a family. A life. You don't need this. I've already got it. You can sell the house. I don't want to. You can walk away. I can't. Why? Because my father spent his life trying to fix this. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, your father never wanted you involved. I know. He wanted you to have a normal life. I had one. And now? I looked at the documents on the table. Now I know it wasn't as normal as I thought. Evelyn smiled sadly. You sound like him. I asked her for the private agreement. She hesitated. Then she handed it to me. It was exactly what we had been looking for. The document showed that Evelyn had never voluntarily transferred ownership. But there was one problem. It wasn't enough by itself. We needed evidence showing that the later transfer had relied on the forged approval. I asked where that document was. Evelyn said, your father hid it. Where? I don't know. I thought about my childhood home. The ledger had been there. Maybe there was more. I drove back to Pennsylvania. On the way, I called Silas. I asked him whether my father had ever mentioned a trustee document. Silas went silent. Then he said, yes. Where is it? I thought he destroyed it. Why? Because he told me it was dangerous. Did he ever say where he kept it? Silas thought for several seconds. Your father's office. My father hasn't had an office in years. I know. What happened to the building? It was sold. To whom? Silas gave me the name. Alderstone Holdings. I nearly pulled the car over. The company that had been looking for my father's evidence now owned the building where he had worked. I asked Silas, was anything left behind? I don't know. I drove directly there. The building had been renovated. The old offices were gone, but the basement storage area remained. I found the property manager. I explained that my father had worked there decades earlier. He let me look through an old storage room. Most of it contained broken furniture and outdated equipment. Then I noticed a metal cabinet. One drawer was locked. I tried the key from my father's old keyring. It opened. Inside was a single envelope. My father's handwriting. Ellis. I opened it. There was a photocopy of the forged approval. And beneath it was a note. If you ever find this, don't trust the title. I kept reading. The person who forged my signature wasn't Brennan. I froze. Brennan was ordered to file it. I read the next line. He didn't create it. Then the final sentence. Ask your mother who had access to my office on August 17th. My mother's name appeared again. I felt confused. My mother had been involved. She had helped Evelyn. She had been framed. But she had also had access to my father's office. I called Silas. He answered immediately. Did my mother have access to my father's office? Yes. Why? She worked there occasionally. What did she do? Bookkeeping. I closed my eyes. Another piece fell into place. My mother had access to my father's signature samples. She had access to the financial records. She had access to Walter's documents. And she had been present on the day the private agreement was created. I started wondering whether Walter's accusation about her had contained a small piece of truth. Maybe she hadn't forged my father's signature. Maybe someone had used her access. I returned home with the document. That evening, I called Dorian. He answered. I found the approval. Silence. Then. Where? Doesn't matter. Is it authentic? No. He laughed quietly. You can't prove that. My father did. Your father isn't here to testify. I have his notes. Notes aren't evidence. The original private agreement is. The line went silent. You found it. Yes. You don't understand what you're holding. Then explain it. Dorian took a breath. My family has spent decades trying to correct what happened. That's not what I heard. You heard Evelyn's version. And your version? My grandfather made a mistake. What kind? He trusted the wrong people. Who? Your mother. I felt anger rise. Don't blame her. You don't know what she did. I know enough. No, you don't. Then Dorian said something that made me stop. Your mother didn't steal the properties. I know. She didn't forge your father's signature. I know. But she did something else. What? She took the original evidence. I stared at the phone. What evidence? The ledger wasn't the only record. I asked. What else? A recording. What recording? Your mother made it. I remembered the old cassette from another part of my father's story. But I had never found it. Dorian continued. She recorded Walter and Brennan discussing the transfers. Where is it? I don't know. Then why are you telling me? Because I think you have it. I don't. You may. Where? Your father trusted you with it. I thought about the house. The house my father had protected. The house Evelyn had wanted me to buy. The house where the entire chain began. Maybe the evidence had never been in the basement. Maybe it had been somewhere much more ordinary. I walked through every room. The living room. kitchen, garage, bedroom. Nothing. Then I remembered something. The house had an old built-in cabinet beside the staircase. I had never opened the bottom drawer because it was stuck. I pulled harder. The drawer came loose. Inside was a small envelope. No name, no date, just one sentence written on the front. Play this only when you know the truth. Inside was a cassette tape. My mother's handwriting. I found an old cassette player. My hands were shaking when I pressed play. At first, there was only static. Then my mother's voice. Clear, calm, and terrified. If you're hearing this, Ellis, then you finally found the house. I stopped breathing. She continued. I need you to understand something. A pause. I was never paid to betray Evelyn. Another pause. The $25,000 was mine. I stared at the cassette player. But I didn't keep it. My mother's voice became quieter. I used it to protect you. Then she said the one sentence I had never expected to hear. The person who threatened our family wasn't Walter Vale. The tape clicked. Then her voice returned. It was someone much closer. I sat completely still beside the cassette player. For almost 40 years, my mother had been reduced to a name in a ledger. A $25,000 payment. A suspicious transaction. A woman accused of helping Walter Vale. Now I was hearing her own voice. And she was telling me that the person who threatened our family wasn't Walter. It was someone much closer. The tape continued. My name was placed on the payment because I agreed to take responsibility for the money. The money was real. I received it. But it was never mine. I leaned closer. I used it to move your father out of Pennsylvania temporarily. I paid for a lawyer. I paid for documents. I paid people who could help us disappear from Walter's attention. Then she paused. But the person who ordered the pressure wasn't Walter. I could hear her breathing. It was Brennan Vale. That didn't surprise me. What came next did. Brennan had access to your father's office. I froze. He knew where Harold kept his signature records. He knew about the private agreement. He knew Evelyn was planning to leave. My mother explained that Brennan had been working with Walter publicly. But privately, he was building something of his own. Walter wanted the properties. Brennan wanted control of the legal machinery that transferred them. He created companies. He prepared documents. He moved ownership between entities. And he kept enough information hidden that even Walter didn't know everything. Then my mother said, Brennan wasn't working for Walter. He was using Walter. That explained the strange structure behind everything. Walter looked like the mastermind. But Brennan had been constructing the system underneath him. The tape continued. Your father discovered it in September 1989. He confronted Brennan. And Brennan made a mistake. My mother explained that Brennan had threatened to expose my father as a participant in the property transfers. But my father had secretly recorded one conversation. That recording was the evidence Dorian had mentioned. The recording captured Brennan admitting that the transfer documents had been prepared before Evelyn agreed to anything. It also captured him discussing the forged approval. And then came the most important part. My mother said, I hid the recording in the house. I looked around my living room. The house was never just a property. It was the safest place because everyone believed the evidence had already been removed. I stopped the tape. I searched the room again. This time, I wasn't looking for something hidden. I was looking for something ordinary. Something my parents might have used every day. I opened drawers, cabinets, closets, the garage. Then I noticed an old electrical outlet in the hallway. It was slightly different from the others. I removed the cover. Behind it was a small plastic case. Inside was another cassette. I put it into the player. Static. Then my father's voice. I hadn't heard his voice in years. He sounded younger. Tired. But clear. September 12th, 1989. Then another voice. Brennan Vale. The conversation was exactly what my mother had described. Brennan admitted that the private agreement was never supposed to become public. He admitted that the property transfers had been prepared in advance. And then he said something that changed the entire story. Evelyn doesn't need to disappear. She just needs to look unreliable. My father's voice asked, What happens to the properties? Brennan answered, They become ours. My father asked, And the Mercer house? Brennan said, That one stays untouched. My father's voice became sharper. Why? Because it's useful. I stopped the tape. The Mercer house. My house. It had been deliberately protected from the larger transfer. Not because Brennan didn't want it. Because he wanted it for something else. I started the tape again. Brennan explained that the property would remain outside the main chain. It could later be used to store records, hide transactions, or provide a clean-looking asset if the other transfers were challenged. My father asked, And what happens if someone buys it? Brennan laughed. Then they inherit the problem. I suddenly understood. The reason my house had remained strangely clean was because Brennan had intentionally kept it separate. The 4-year gap wasn't an accident. The house had been used as a legal anchor, a clean title surrounded by dirty transactions. And when Orson inherited it, the problem continued. But there was one thing Brennan couldn't have predicted. I would buy it. And I would find everything. I contacted an attorney the next morning. Not Brennan. Not anyone connected to Alderstone. A completely independent property attorney named Mara Voss. I showed her the documents. The private agreement. The forged approval. The ledger. The recordings. She spent 2 days reviewing everything. On the 3rd day, she called me. Ellis, I need you to sit down. I was already sitting. She said, the title isn't worthless. I waited. But the historical transfer is challengeable. What does that mean for me? You're the current legal owner. Can someone take the house? Not easily. What about Evelyn? She may have a claim. To the house? Yes. I looked at the private agreement. But she doesn't want it. That doesn't matter. What matters? The law. Mara explained that Evelyn could potentially challenge the transfer history, but the case was complicated by decades of subsequent transactions. However, the recordings changed the situation. They established intent. The forged approval established misconduct, and the ledger established a financial pattern. Together, they could potentially affect the ownership of the other properties. I asked, what should I do? She said, preserve everything. So I did. I gave copies to my attorney. Then, with Evelyn's permission, the evidence was submitted to the appropriate authorities. The investigation took months, then years. Alderstone Holdings fought it. Brennan Vale denied everything. Dorian claimed he had inherited a complicated business structure without knowing its origins. But the recordings were difficult to explain. The handwriting records were difficult to explain. The ledger was difficult to explain. And the private agreement was almost impossible to dismiss. Eventually, the original property transfers involving Evelyn were formally reviewed. 23 properties were examined. Not all of them were affected, but several were. Some owners had been unknowingly living on properties whose histories were tied to the 1989 transactions. A few families discovered that their properties had been transferred through the same network of companies. The legal process took years, but the truth finally became part of the official record. Evelyn's name was restored to the historical documents. She wasn't accused of voluntarily surrendering her properties. My mother's name was cleared from the false payment allegation. The $25,000 was finally explained. And my father's role became clear. He hadn't been the mastermind. He had started as a consultant. Then he became a witness. Then he became an investigator. And finally, he became the person who protected the evidence. As for the house, I kept it. Evelyn never asked for it. She told me something I'll never forget. Your father wanted you to have a place where nobody could tell you what was true. I understood what she meant. The house had been a trap for some people, a hiding place for others, a piece of evidence for my father, and eventually a second chance for Evelyn. She visited the property once before she died. We sat on the back porch. She looked toward the trees. This place looks exactly the same. It needs work. She smiled. Everything does. I asked her whether she regretted leaving. She said, I regretted leaving people behind. Then she looked at me. Especially your father. I asked whether she loved him. She smiled. He was the only man who ever believed me when believing me was dangerous. That was all she said. She died the following spring. I attended the funeral. Celia was there. Orson was there. Even Dorian Vale appeared briefly. He didn't speak to me. He simply stood at the back. After the funeral, I received one final envelope. It was from Celia. Inside was a copy of a letter my father had written shortly before he died. It was addressed to me. I had never seen it. The letter said, Ellis, if you ever learn about the house, I want you to know one thing. I never wanted you to inherit my unfinished problems. I wanted you to inherit the freedom I didn't have. If the truth eventually finds you, don't spend your life trying to punish everyone who lied. Some people will deserve consequences. Others will simply be carrying their own fear. Tell the truth. Then let yourself live. I read that letter several times. Then I put it away. I didn't sell the house. I didn't turn it into some monument to the past. I renovated it. New floors. New windows. A new kitchen. I repaired the old garage. And I planted 3 maple trees in the backyard. One for my father. One for my mother. And one for Evelyn. The strangest part is that people still ask me why I bought the house. Sometimes I tell them it was a good deal. Sometimes I tell them I liked the neighborhood. But the real answer is much harder to explain. I bought it because I thought I was buying a quiet place to spend the rest of my life. Instead, I bought the one piece of property that connected 3 families, 23 disputed properties, a decades-old financial scheme, and a secret my parents had carried to their graves. And after everything was over, I finally understood why the deed had bothered me so much. It wasn't just that one name was missing. It was that an entire story had been erased. For 37 years, everyone involved had accepted the official version because it was easier. A woman supposedly walked away. A businessman supposedly acquired some properties. An attorney supposedly handled the paperwork. A family supposedly inherited a house. And a title company supposedly confirmed everything was clean. But none of those statements explained what really happened. The truth was buried in private agreements, old financial records, forgotten photographs, and voices recorded on tapes nobody thought would survive. And the person who eventually uncovered it wasn't a lawyer, wasn't an investigator, wasn't a journalist. It was simply the man who bought the house. The house that had one name missing from the deed. And perhaps that was exactly why the house had been waiting for me. Because sometimes the truth doesn't disappear. It just waits for the right person to finally ask why something is missing. Would you have kept digging into the house's history after discovering that your own family was connected to the secret?